If you want to start a fight at a family Thanksgiving, just tell your uncle that renting a house is actually a smarter financial move than buying one. You will be greeted with the same look people give to someone claiming the earth is flat. We have been conditioned, almost since birth, to believe that renting is the ultimate financial sin. We are told it is throwing money away. We are told we are paying someone else's mortgage instead of building our own kingdom. It is a powerful narrative, backed by decades of societal pressure and real estate marketing. But here is the problem. The math does not care about your uncle's feelings. When you actually sit down and look at the unrecoverable costs of both lifestyles, you start to realize that homeowners are throwing away just as much money as renters. They just happen to be throwing it into different bins. Today, I want to pull back the curtain on the house buying myth. I want to show you the math that real estate agents usually forget to mention. Because once you understand the unrecoverable cost equation, you might realize that the white picket fence is actually a very expensive cage for your capital. I am Tom, and I spend far too much time reading financial reports, so you do not have to. Before we dive into the spreadsheets and the hidden fees, I have a quick request. If you find that this deep dive gives you a better return on your time than a standard financial advice video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It is the best way to make sure you do not miss our weekly audits of common financial dogmas. We are going to deconstruct the unrecoverable cost equation today, piece by piece. We will look at why interest is just rent for money, why your house is a depreciating asset disguised as a savings account, and how a disciplined renter can actually end up twice as wealthy as a homeowner over 30 years. This is not about being anti-home. It is about being pro-math. If you are ready to see why your landlord might actually be doing you a favour, let's get into the first layer of the myth, the illusion of paying yourself. The core of the renting is throwing money away argument is that rent is a sunk cost, while a mortgage is a form of forced savings. People love to say, at least with a mortgage I am paying myself. I have run those numbers, and for the first decade of a 30-year mortgage, you are mostly paying the bank, not yourself. Think about the way a standard mortgage is structured. It is called amortization, which is just a fancy word for the bank gets its money first. In the early years, the vast majority of your monthly check goes straight to interest. That interest is an unrecoverable cost. It is gone. You are never seeing that money again. It does not build equity. It does not increase your net worth. It is, quite literally, rent that you are paying to the bank for the privilege of using their money. If you pay $2,000 a month for a mortgage, and $1,500 of that is interest, you are throwing away $1,500. The landlord just has a different name. In this case, it's the big building with the vault downtown. We need to stop pretending that every dollar sent to a mortgage lender is a deposit into a piggy bank. It is not. Then there is the concept of opportunity cost, which is the invisible tax on every decision we make. When you buy a home, you usually have to drop a massive down payment. Let's say it's $100,000. The moment you hand that check to the seller, that money is effectively dead. It is trapped in the walls of your house. It is no longer out in the world, working for you, compounding in the stock market, or funding a business. Most people compare their rent to their mortgage payment, but they forget to compare what that $100,000 could have done if it stayed in a low-cost index fund. Historically, the stock market returns significantly more than the appreciation of a primary residence. By locking that capital into a house, you are forfeiting those potential gains. That loss of potential profit is an unrecoverable cost, just as real as a rent check. If your house goes up 3% a year, but the market goes up 8%, you are essentially paying a 5% hidden rent every year just for the privilege of owning the deed. This is the part of the equation that makes most homeowners very uncomfortable, because it turns their investment into a massive trade-off. To settle this debate once and for all, we have to look at the unrecoverable cost equation. This is the only fair way to compare renting and buying. An unrecoverable cost is any money that leaves your pocket and provides no long-term equity. For a renter, this equation is refreshingly simple. You have your monthly rent, and you have your renter's insurance. That is it. If your rent is $2,000 and your insurance is $20, your unrecoverable cost is $2,020. You know exactly what your waste is every single month. There are no surprise roof leaks that cost $10,000. There are no property tax hikes that you have to scramble to cover. Your rent is the absolute maximum you will pay for housing in a given month. This simplicity is a feature, not a bug. It allows for a level of financial forecasting that homeowners can only dream of. When a renter's sink breaks, they call the landlord and it costs them $0. When a homeowner's sink breaks, they spend their Saturday at the hardware store and their Sunday crying over a plumbing bill. That certainty has a massive financial value. Now, let's look at the homeowner's unrecoverable cost equation, and I should warn you, it is crowded. It starts with mortgage interest, which we already established is just rent for money. Then we add property taxes, which you have to pay forever. Even after the mortgage is gone, the government is still your landlord. Next, we add maintenance and repairs. Houses are physical structures made of wood and metal that are constantly trying to rot, rust, or break. You have to spend money just to keep the house from losing value. Then there is homeowners insurance, which is significantly more expensive than renters insurance. If you live in a managed community, you might have HOA fees, which are purely unrecoverable. Finally, we add the cost of capital, the lost interest on your equity. When you add all these up, interest, taxes, maintenance, insurance, fees, and opportunity cost, the total is often staggering. In many cases, the money thrown away by a homeowner is actually higher than the rent paid by someone down the street. If you think that is a bold claim, wait until we look at the 5% rule. This is where the math gets really interesting. And it is the exact point where most people realize they have been looking at real estate all wrong. Portfolio manager Ben Felix popularized a brilliant heuristic called the 5% rule. It is a quick way to estimate the unrecoverable costs of home ownership, so you can compare it to rent without needing a PhD in accounting. The rule says that the annual cost of owning a home is roughly 5% of the property's total value. Where does that 5% come from? We break it down into 3 buckets. First is 1% for property taxes. This varies by state, but 1% is a solid national average. Second is 1% for maintenance. This is the rule of thumb that says you should set aside 1% of your home's value every year just to fix things that break. A $500,000 house needs $5,000 a year in work. Finally, the biggest bucket is 3% for the cost of capital. This accounts for the interest you pay the bank, or the interest you are not earning in the stock market because your money is tied up in your walls. When you add those up, you get 5%. This is the annual rent you are paying to the world just to exist in that house. If you divide that 5% by 12, you get your monthly break-even point for renting. Let's put some real numbers to this. Imagine you are looking at a house worth $500,000. 5% of $500,000 is $25,000. That is your annual unrecoverable cost. Divide that by 12 and you get $2,083. What does this tell us? It tells us that if you can rent a comparable home for less than $2,083 a month, renting is the mathematically superior choice. You would be throwing away less money as a renter than you would as an owner. This rule flips the script. It shows that there is a specific price point where buying becomes a luxury, not an investment. If you are paying $2,500 in rent for that same house, then buying might start to make sense. But in many high-cost cities, you can rent a $1 million condo for $4,000 a month. The 5% rule on a $1 million home is over $4,000 a month. In that scenario, the renter is actually the one being frugal, while the owner is bleeding cash through 1,000 small cuts. This heuristic is a reality check for anyone who thinks a deed is a shortcut to wealth. To see how this plays out over a lifetime, let's look at two people, buyer Bob and renter Rachel. They both have $100,000 in the bank, and they both want to live in the same neighborhood. Bob buys a $500,000 house. He uses his $100,000 for the down payment and takes out a $400,000 mortgage at 7%. Between his principal, interest, taxes, maintenance, and insurance, Bob is writing a check for $3,700 every single month. He feels proud because he is a homeowner. Rachel looks at the same neighborhood and decides to rent a similar house for $2,500. She keeps her $100,000 in a broad market index fund. Because her rent is lower than Bob's total monthly outflow, Rachel has an extra $1,200 left over every month. She does not spend it on lattes or shoes. She automates that $1,200 straight into her investment account. On the surface, it looks like Bob is winning because he owns something. But if you think Bob is building wealth faster, you are in for a shock. We need to look at what happens when we fast forward 30 years. If you think the house wins because it's paid off, you are missing the most powerful force in the universe: compound interest. 30 years later, Bob makes his final mortgage payment. He throws a party. His house has appreciated at about 3.5% a year, which is the historical average. His $500,000 home is now worth $1.4 million. He has a $0 mortgage and a massive asset. He feels like a genius. But now, let's look at Rachel. Rachel's initial $100,000, invested in the S&P 500 with an 8% return, has grown to over $1 million on its own. But she also invested that $1,200 monthly difference. Those monthly contributions, compounded over 30 years at 8%, have grown to over $1.6 million. When you add it all up, Rachel's liquid net worth is $2.6 million. Rachel is over $1 million wealthier than Bob, and her wealth is entirely liquid. She can sell a portion of it whenever she wants without paying a 6% realtor commission. Bob has a $1.4 million asset that he has to live inside. He still has to pay property taxes and maintenance, which have also inflated over 30 years. Rachel's index funds don't need a new roof. They don't need their lawn mowed. This is the math that society forgets to tell you. Renting and investing the difference is not just an alternative, it is often the superior wealth-building engine. Beyond the raw numbers, we have to talk about the phantom costs of homeownership that never show up on a bank statement. One of the biggest is the weekend penalty. Time is the only truly non-renewable resource we have. When a pipe bursts in Rachel's rental, she sends a text to the landlord and goes for a walk. When a pipe bursts in Bob's house, his entire Saturday is gone. He is at the hardware store, he is watching YouTube tutorials, and he is covered in grey water. Homeowners often brag about sweat equity. But sweat equity is just a fancy term for working a second job as a handyman for $0 an hour. If Bob values his time at $50 an hour, and he spends 10 hours a month on home maintenance and yard work, he is paying an extra $6,000 a year in time rent. Renters are essentially outsourcing all the labour of property management to the landlord for a fixed monthly fee. That freedom to use your weekends for rest, family, or a side hustle is a massive financial advantage that people routinely ignore. You can't get those Saturdays back, no matter how much your house appreciates. Then there is the mobility premium. Renting gives you the freedom to move where the opportunity is. If a job offer comes along in a different state that pays $40,000 more a year, Rachel can pack her bags and be gone in 30 days. For Bob, moving is a logistical and financial nightmare. He has to list the house, pay tens of thousands in commissions, and hope the market is up when he needs to sell. This geographic lock-in can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in lifetime earnings because you are shackled to a specific zip code by a mortgage. Before we move on to the behavioral side of this, I want to invite you to join the Optimizers. If you click the Join button below, you become a member of this channel. You get custom badges and, more importantly, priority replies in the comments, where we can really dig into these numbers together. It is a great way to support the deep dive research we do here. Now, if the math favors renting so much, why are homeowners statistically wealthier than renters? The answer isn't the house. It is the behavior. This is where we have to be honest about human nature and how we handle money when no one is forcing us to save. The reason the average homeowner has a higher net worth than the average renter is not because real estate is a better investment. It is because a mortgage is a forced savings account for people who lack discipline. Most people are not like renter Rachel. When they save money by renting, they do not invest the difference. They spend the difference. They buy a nicer car, they eat out more often, and they take more expensive vacations. The bank, however, does not care about your vacation. If you do not pay your mortgage, they take your house. This threat of foreclosure forces people to build equity every month for 30 years. For the average person, this is the only way they will ever accumulate $1 million. But for the financially literate, for the person who can automate their investments and treat their brokerage account with the same must-pay attitude as a mortgage, the forced savings benefit of a house disappears. If you can recreate that discipline artificially, you can capture the higher returns of the stock market without the drag of property taxes and maintenance. The wealth gap between renters and owners is a behavioral gap, not an asset gap. If you want to win as a renter, you have to be your own bank and your own enforcer. The ultimate danger of the home ownership myth is reaching retirement and being house rich but cash poor. I have seen it happen far too often. Someone reaches 65 with a paid-off home worth $1 million, but they only have $100,000 in their retirement account. You cannot eat your drywall. You cannot pay for a surgery with your shingles. That $1 million asset is illiquid and, ironically, it still costs money to keep. Even without a mortgage, you are still paying for taxes, insurance, and the inevitable decay of the structure. Many retirees find themselves struggling to pay for basic needs while sitting on a massive pile of equity they can't access without selling their home and moving. Renter Rachel, on the other hand, reaches 65 with $2.5 million in liquid stocks. She can use the 4% rule to pull out $100,000 a year. She can pay her rent easily and still have plenty left for travel and healthcare. Her wealth produces cash flow, while Bob's wealth consumes it. This is why we have to stop viewing our primary residence as a retirement plan. It is a place to live. It is a consumption item. If it happens to go up in value, that is a nice bonus, but it should never be the foundation of your financial independence. We need to reframe how we think about rent. Rent is not a penalty for failing to buy a house. Rent is a subscription service for shelter and freedom. You are paying a fixed fee to have a roof over your head, zero liability for repairs, and the ability to move whenever you want. You are paying for the privilege of keeping your capital and putting it to work in more productive places. When you look at it that way, the throwing money away narrative falls apart. Buying a home can be a wonderful lifestyle choice. If you want to paint your walls neon green or plant a specific garden, or if you just value the psychological stability of owning your domain, then buy a house. But do it because you want the lifestyle, not because you think it is the only way to get rich. The math shows us a different path. It shows us that a disciplined renter, armed with the Unrecoverable Cost Equation and a broad market index fund, can build a life of immense wealth and flexibility. So, the next time someone tells you that you are throwing money away by renting, just smile. You know something they don't. You know that you are not failing the American dream, you are just taking a more efficient route to it. I want to hear your thoughts on this. Does the 5% rule change how you look at your neighborhood? Drop a comment below and let's get a data-driven discussion going. I will be down there replying to as many as I can. Until next time, keep running the numbers. I am Tom, and this is Tom Talks Money.